I still remember my mother's kitchen so clearly that night, even though nothing was cooking on the stove. There was only the smell of old Christmases of butter flour, and all the years I had spent standing behind the kitchen door listening to my family laugh and talk, as if dinner had somehow appeared by itself on those white plates. It was Christmas Eve in Denver. Outside the window, a thin layer of snow covered the row of pine trees. In the living room, more than 20 guests were raising their glasses, and I was standing in the cold kitchen wearing the apron. My mother had just shoved into my hands both of my palms dusted with flour, because I had been about to do what I always did. Lower my head, stay silent, and save a party that did not belong to me. My mother, Margaret Carter, walked in with a glass of wine in her hand. She looked at the empty stove, then at the counter, where there was no turkey, no mashed potatoes, and the corner of her mouth lifted in that familiar way that had always made me feel small. "Evelyn," she said, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "It's only a little over 20 people. Why haven't you started cooking yet?" I looked at her. I could hear my younger sister Natalie laughing from the living room. She was talking about the marketing campaign at my father's company, and everyone was listening closely. Meanwhile, I was 37 years old, the founder of a $1 million event company, and I was still being summoned into the kitchen like a daughter, whose only value was in serving others. If your family has ever looked down on you even after everything you tried to do for them, comment 1. And if you want to hear the rest of this story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel, so you will not miss the stories hidden behind the silence. I did not tell my mother that the next morning, I had a meeting in Miami with the female CEO of a major corporation. I did not tell her that the contract waiting for my signature could change the future of my company. I also did not tell her that over the past year my company had brought in more than $4 million in revenue, a number that would have made my parents open champagne immediately if Natalie had been the one saying it. I only looked down at the apron on my body. 15 years. I had let that apron decide my place. Whenever they needed someone to cook, they called me. Whenever they needed someone to clean, they called me. Whenever there were important guests, they pushed Natalie into the light and placed me behind the kitchen door. When my mother was about to say something more about responsibility and family, I untied the apron. She frowned. "What are you doing?" I folded the apron and placed it on the counter. "I'm not cooking this dinner," I said. My mother laughed as if she had just heard a child say something ridiculous. But this time I did not apologize. I did not explain. I simply picked up my phone, opened the flight booking app, and chose a one-way ticket to Miami. That was the moment I walked out of the kitchen. And it was also the moment my family began losing the person they had always believed they could order around. None of it truly began on that Christmas Eve. It had started long before that, during the first winter after I graduated from college. I was 22. Then fresh out of school with a degree in communications, a few polished letters of recommendation, and a naive belief that if I worked hard enough life would eventually open its doors. But America was not gentle to young graduates that year. The economy had just taken a brutal fall. Companies were cutting staff, new positions disappeared before I could even send in my resume, and my job applications kept sinking into silence like stones thrown onto a frozen lake. I moved back into my old room in my parents' house in Denver, slept in the bed I had used in high school, and woke up every morning feeling as if I were moving backward in my own life. That afternoon, our house smelled of fresh pine and cinnamon. My mother was hanging a wreath on the door and arranging porcelain angels on the mantel. My father walked around the living room checking the wine, as if he were preparing to welcome important investors. 15 guests were coming for dinner. Relatives, my father's friends, and a few people my mother wanted to impress. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, trying to revise a cover letter for a marketing position I desperately hoped would finally answer me. My mother walked in holding a dinner menu in her hand. "Evelyn, you'll take care of dinner," she said. She did not ask. She announced it. I looked up, thinking I must have heard her wrong. The whole dinner, Mom. Who else would do it? She placed the paper in front of me. Natalie has final exams. She needs to focus. I look toward the living room. Natalie, my younger sister, was stretched out on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with one hand and holding a mug of hot chocolate, with the other giggling at something someone had texted her. She was a college freshman, and ever since we were children, she had been treated like a precious project the whole family had to protect from even the smallest inconvenience. I have job applications to send too, I said quietly. There's a position at a media company, and the deadline is tonight. My mother looked at me with an expression that was both tired and accusing, as if I had just said something selfish. You can send applications tomorrow. This is family. Family has to know what comes first. I remember that sentence so clearly. Not because it was unusual, but because it would be repeated so many times afterward, each time like an invisible rope pulling me back into the kitchen. Family has to know what comes first. Strangely, though, the person who always had to put family first was me. Natalie was prioritized so she could rest, study, see her friends, and build her future. I was prioritized for the tasks no one else wanted to do. For the next 2 days, I barely left the kitchen. I thawed the turkey, seasoned it, chopped vegetables, mashed potatoes, baked pies, wiped glasses, folded napkins, and polished silverware. When the guests arrived, Natalie stood beside my father, in a red dress, smiling brightly beneath the lights. And I moved through the living room carrying a tray of hot stuffed mushrooms, my apron stained with sauce. A woman named Grace complimented the food and said it was delicious. My mother only gave a faint smile. That's Evelyn, she said. She has plenty of time. She still doesn't have a job. I stood there, my hands still warm from the tray, and for the first time I understood something clearly. In that house, my sacrifices would never be called effort. They would only be treated as something everyone had a right to expect. After that Christmas dinner, I told myself it was only temporary. I thought that because I had just graduated, because I did not yet have a stable job, and because I was living in my parents' house helping the family, was simply the right thing to do. I tried to see it in the gentlest possible way, as if being understanding and patient enough would make them see me one day as more than the person who knew how to cook and clear the table. But some roles, once you accept them, make other people start believing they are your duty. The following Thanksgiving, my mother called me down to the kitchen early in the morning. She said Natalie had to attend a study group at school, though I later found out she had only gone shopping with her friends. I cooked the turkey, made the gravy, prepared 3 side dishes, and washed every crystal glass. My mother only brought out when important guests were coming. When everyone sat down at the table, my father raised his glass to congratulate Natalie because her grade point average had gone up slightly. No one mentioned that I had been standing in the kitchen for more than 10 hours, so that dinner could happen at all. Then came Easter. Then my father's birthday. Then my parents' anniversary party. Then the small dinners my mother said would only include a few people, but somehow always turned into a house full of guests. Every time my mother said the same familiar sentence. Evelyn, help me with the food. You're fast at these things. Fast. Easy. Convenient. Those words sounded harmless, but when they were repeated long enough, they turned my time into something that had no value. If Natalie had an exam, she was excused. If Natalie was tired, she was allowed to rest. If Natalie had plans, no one blamed her. But if I said I was busy, my mother would sigh as if I had betrayed some sacred promise. The most painful part was not the cooking. I had never hated creating a warm dinner. The most painful part was the way they let me disappear in the very rooms I had prepared with my own hands. I arranged the flowers on the table, but Natalie was praised for having good taste. I chose the wine to match the main course, but my father said Natalie was the one who understood business. I fixed every napkin, every crooked chair, every appetizer that went cold because the guests arrived late. But when the party succeeded, my mother accepted the compliments, as if all of it had been a miracle. She created herself. Once one of my father's friends asked what I was doing after college. I had just opened my mouth when my mother cut in. Evelyn is still trying to find her direction. She's a little slower than Natalie. The whole table gave a soft laugh. It was not openly cruel, but it was enough to make my face burn. Natalie looked down at her wineglass and smiled as if the comparison were the most natural thing in the world. My father did not correct it. No one corrected it. And instead of telling the truth, I stood up and brought more bread to the table. I began to understand that in my family, my silence was not seen as pain. It was seen as permission. Years passed. I moved out, found my own job, and built my own life. But every holiday, my mother's phone call still came. She never asked whether I was free. She simply told me what time I needed to be there. And strangely, the daughter in me always arrived on time, tied on the apron, and told herself it was only one more dinner. But one dinner became another. One holiday season became the next, and I did not realize how many years I had lost just to keep other people sitting in the light, while I stood behind the kitchen door wiping my hands on an apron and waiting for someone to remember that I was also a daughter in that house. In 2012, I started my event company in a small rented apartment in Capitol Hill. I named it Carter & Bloom Events, a name that sounded much bigger than what it actually was back then. In reality, there was only me, an aging laptop, a notebook packed with scribbled plans, and a quiet belief that if my family could not see my worth, I would build another place where that worth could exist. I did not have a beautiful office. I had no staff. No backing. No powerful connections. My first clients were small shop owners, couples who needed someone to plan a wedding on a tight budget, and a few local companies that wanted to host product launches but could not afford the larger agencies. I accepted all of it. I called vendors myself, negotiated flower prices myself, drove out to pick up table linens myself, and stayed awake until nearly dawn fixing seating charts because one guest had changed their mind at the last minute. There were nights when I came back to my apartment, took off my high heels, and found my feet swollen. There were mornings when I drank cold coffee instead of eating breakfast, answering emails while checking invoices. But strangely, no matter how exhausted I was, I still felt alive. For the first time in years, I was not standing behind a kitchen door serving a dream that did not belong to me. I was building something of my own, piece by piece. The first time I told my mother, she was sitting in the living room reading a magazine. I said I had just been hired to organize an event for a small technology company. The budget was not huge, but it was my first official contract. My mother did not look up right away. "A children's birthday party?" she asked. I swallowed the tightness in my throat. "No, a product launch. There will be investors and local press." "Oh," she said, turning to the next page. "That's nice. By the way, can you stop by tomorrow and pick up my dry cleaning?" That was all. A moment that could have been the first milestone of my life was folded away by her like a scrap of paper. I stood there for a few seconds waiting for her to ask more. "What is the company called? Who is the client? Are you excited? Do you need any help?" But no questions came. In that room, my dream weighed less than a bag of dry cleaning. My father was no different. When I told him I was building a company, he nodded as if I had said I was taking a weekend class. "Do it for fun," he said. "But don't forget that real life isn't as easy as you think." From that day on, I stopped telling them. Not because I was ashamed, but because every time I brought joy home, I had to watch it being placed lower than Natalie's smallest achievement. When Natalie got promoted at my father's company, the whole family went out to celebrate. When I landed my first major client, I bought myself a cheap glass of champagne and drank it alone by the window. But Carter and Bloom kept growing. Year after year, each small contract led to a larger one. One satisfied client recommended me to another. One successful party opened the door to a new opportunity. I learned how to walk into meeting rooms with my back straight, my voice steady, and my eyes no longer looking away. Out in the world, people began calling me a founder, a chief executive officer, A woman who could turn a chaotic idea into an event clients would never forget. But in my parents' house, I was still Evelyn, the one who made very good mashed potatoes. In November 2024, I walked into my parents' house on an afternoon, so cold that my breath showed clearly on the porch. I had just come back from 3 weeks of barely sleeping. Carter and Bloom Events had secured a major contract with a hotel chain in California, worth more than $600,000. It was the kind of contract I had once only dared to write into my 5-year plan. And somehow I had done it. On the drive to my parents' house, I had a very naive thought. Maybe today I would tell them. Not to brag. I simply wanted my parents to know that the daughter they once believed had no direction had truly found her path. But the moment I stepped through the door, my mother placed an apron in my hands. "You got here just in time," she said as if I were an employee called in for a shift. "The turkey needs to be basted every 30 minutes. I already wrote out the schedule." I looked at the sheet of paper she had pinned under a magnet on the refrigerator. Every time slot had been carefully written down, from basting the turkey, stirring the potatoes, warming the gravy, to moving the pumpkin pie onto the table. There was not one line asking whether I was tired. Not one line asking how work was going. There was only a cold assignment sheet for the person. Everyone in that house automatically believed would always arrive on time to handle the heaviest part. I stood there in my coat still dusted with snow, my hands still holding the bag with the signed contract inside. A contract large enough to pay my team for months. A contract that had made my employees hug each other in the office because they knew we had just reached a new level. And my mother only cared about the turkey. From the living room, I heard my father laugh loudly. He was talking to Harold Whitman, his longtime business partner. Natalie sat near the fireplace in a cream sweater holding a glass of wine, saying that this year at my father's company, she had helped increase revenue a little through a new email campaign. My father immediately raised his glass. "Natalie really has a mind for business," he said proudly. "She's going to take this company far." I stood behind the kitchen door listening to every word fall over me like cold snow. No one knew my company had grown by more than 30% that year. No one knew I had 23 employees, an office in downtown Denver, and clients who had flown in from New York just to meet me. No one knew because no one had ever asked long enough to hear the answer. Dinner that night was perfect as always. The turkey was golden, the mashed potatoes were smooth, the gravy was fragrant, and the pumpkin pie was just sweet enough. My mother accepted the compliments with her familiar smile. Natalie was introduced by my father to a few potential clients, and I stood in the kitchen, my hands soaking in the sink, staring at the layer of grease floating on the water and feeling something inside me quietly go out. It was not love. I still loved my family in an exhausted and wounded way. What went out was hope. The hope that if I did enough, they would become gentler. The hope that if I succeeded enough, they would finally realize it on their own. The hope that one day my mother would walk into the kitchen not to hand me another task, but to hug me and ask, "Daughter, are you doing okay these days?" That evening, while everyone was still laughing and talking in the living room, I dried my hands, untied the apron, and hung it on the hook behind the door. I looked at it for a long time. Then I made myself a promise. This would be the last holiday I allowed myself to be treated like a servant in my own family. 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, with snow covering the rooftops of Denver, I returned to the office with a schedule so full, it felt almost suffocating. December was always a chaotic season in the events industry, but that morning felt different. After the promise I had made in my mother's kitchen, it felt as if the whole world was testing whether I truly dared to choose myself. Marcus Reed, our chief financial officer and the mentor I trusted most, knocked lightly on the glass door of my office. He was much older than I was, with silver hair at his temples and a voice that was always deep and calm. Marcus had been beside me since the days when the company had only one small client. "Evelyn," he said, placing a tablet on my desk. "You need to see this." On the screen was an email from Victoria Hayes, the chief executive officer of Meridian Holdings, a major hotel and real estate corporation based in Miami. People said Victoria was not easy to impress, and even less likely to sign with a company she had never personally evaluated. The subject line made me read it twice. Exclusive partnership proposal for all Meridian events next year. I sat up straight. Meridian wanted Carter and Bloom to handle its investor gala, client receptions, project launches, and internal conferences throughout the following year. They had reviewed our portfolio, spoken with past clients, and wanted to meet me before signing. The contract was worth more than $2 million. I looked at Marcus. "Is this real?" He nodded. I confirmed it with their legal team. "It's real. But there's one condition." I was used to sentences like that. Big opportunities rarely arrived without a narrow door attached. "Victoria wants to meet you in person in Miami. She's flying to Switzerland right after Christmas and won't be back until mid-January. The only date they offered is the morning of December 24th. I went silent. Christmas Eve. The same day my mother had always automatically assumed I belonged in her kitchen. Marcus looked at me for a long moment. "If we don't sign that day, Meridian will move on to another company. Lux Affairs has been pursuing them for months. Lux Affairs was my biggest competitor. If I lost Meridian, it would not just be about losing money. It would send a signal to the entire industry that Carter and Bloom was not quite at that level yet." In the attached file, there was one line that made my throat tighten. Victoria wrote that she had been deeply impressed by the Forbes article about me, and that the woman behind Carter and Bloom seemed like someone she wanted to work with long-term. That Forbes article was something I had never shown my family. I had been afraid they would laugh, criticize how tired I looked in the photo, or ask why Natalie had not been featured instead. But Victoria Hayes had read it, and she had seen me. I closed the laptop and slowly breathed in. "Book the ticket for me," I said. "I'm going to Miami." On December 23rd, just after I confirmed my flight to Miami, my phone vibrated on the desk. My mother's name appeared on the screen. Just those two words were enough to make my shoulders tense, as if my body had learned to prepare for an order rather than a conversation. Marcus stood near the door looking at me with the eyes of someone who had watched me shrink too many times whenever my family called. At last I answered. "Evelyn, you finally picked up," my mother said. "The Christmas plan has changed. This year, Natalie is bringing some friends, and your father has invited a few business partners. A little over 20 people in total. I need you there tomorrow morning." I closed my eyes. "I can't." The silence on the other end lasted exactly one beat before my mother's voice turned cold. "What do you mean, you can't?" "I have a business trip. I have to fly to Miami tonight to meet a very important client." My mother laughed. Not loudly but sharply enough to cut through the last of my calm. "Miami. To organize some little party. Evelyn, don't be dramatic. Your work can be moved." I looked through the glass wall of my office. I had negotiated with chief executive officers, handled crises, and saved events worth hundreds of thousands of dollars from collapsing. And yet, under my mother's voice, I still felt like the 22-year-old girl standing beside the oven. "It can't be moved," I said. "This is the biggest contract my company has ever had." "Your company." She emphasized those two words as if they were part of a game. "Evelyn, you're 37 years old. Stop turning a few hired parties into some grand career. Natalie is under a lot of pressure at your father's company. She needs a proper evening. You only need to cook one meal. Only need." Those two words almost made me laugh and cry at the same time. Only need to stay on my feet from morning until night. Only need to stand in the kitchen while everyone else raised their glasses. Only need to disappear so my sister could shine. If you have ever been called selfish simply because you dared to say no comment, I understand. If this story touches you like the video, share it with someone who also needs to set boundaries, and subscribe to the channel to hear the reversal that comes next. My mother was still talking. She said she had been preparing the decorations for days, that my father had important guests, and that Natalie would be embarrassed if the dinner was not perfect. Then she lowered her voice and used the exact sentence that had kept me trapped in the kitchen for 15 years. Family always comes first. This time I did not nod. No, I said. I'm not coming to cook that dinner. What did you just say? I said no. My mother's breathing grew heavier. If you walk away from this family over one meaningless trip, don't expect to come back. I thought that sentence would break me. But strangely, what moved through me was relief. Maybe because for the first time, the door she had used to keep me trapped had accidentally opened. Then I won't come back the old way anymore, I replied. Then I hung up. That evening, I returned to my apartment in Lohi, after the city lights had already come on. Denver beyond the glass was covered in a cold blue, the rooftops lying silent beneath the snow, while inside me, everything felt as loud as if I had just stepped out of a room full of people shouting. My phone kept vibrating. My mother. Nathalie. My father. Then my mother again. Each name appeared like a hand trying to pull me back into the old kitchen. I placed the phone face down on the table and opened my suitcase. I did not pack much. A charcoal suit for the meeting, a soft sweater for the flight, my laptop company documents, the Meridian contract draft, and a few notes about Carter and Bloom's operational capacity. I folded each item slowly, as if proving to myself that this trip was real, that I had not invented my own importance just to stand against my mother. When I reached the bottom drawer of my desk, I froze. The October issue of Forbes was still there, its edges almost new because I had read it so many times, but had never dared to let anyone in my family see it. Across the center page was a photo of me standing in my office, my arms lightly folded, the Denver skyline behind me. The article called me the quiet woman, reshaping the corporate events industry through precision discipline and an ability to make clients feel deeply understood. I remembered the day the article came out. My employees had bought a cake. Marcus opened champagne. The whole office applauded when I walked in. I had laughed, felt my eyes sting, and thought I should send the article to my parents. Then I imagined my mother's voice. You look tired in this photo. I imagined my father asking whether the revenue was truly stable. I imagined Natalie giving a faint smile and saying the media always exaggerated things. So I put it away. But that night I placed the Forbes issue into my suitcase. Not to show off. I needed it as proof, a thin piece of armor for the daughter inside me who was still trembling after my mother's call. Denver airport was packed with people going home for Christmas. I pulled my suitcase past lines of people holding gifts, holding children, holding each other amid the smell of hot coffee and wool scarves damp with snow. For a moment, I felt a sharp ache in my chest. I was leaving home on the night before Christmas, too. But unlike the years before this time, I was not abandoning my family. I was only abandoning the role they had written for me. When the plane took off close to 9 at night, Denver shrank beneath a layer of white-gray clouds. I opened my laptop to review the contract again, but my eyes kept drifting toward the Forbes issue tucked into the seat pocket in front of me. Around midnight, somewhere above Texas, I took it out and reread the opening line. Evelyn Carter does not believe in making noise. She believes in showing up at the right time, doing the right work, and letting the results speak for themselves. I closed the magazine. For the first time in many years, I felt that I no longer needed anyone in my family to confirm that truth for me. I arrived in Miami before the city had fully awakened. Warm, humid air rushed against my face the moment I stepped out of the airport, so different from the skin-cutting cold of Denver. The hotel overlooked the ocean and was so elegant that even the sounds in the lobby seemed softened. I managed to sleep for a few hours, then woke before my alarm, my heart racing, because I knew that in just a few more hours, everything I had built over many years would be placed on the negotiating table. That morning, I put on my charcoal suit, tied my hair neatly, and checked the documents in my leather briefcase one more time. In the mirror, I saw a woman calmer than I expected. Not because I was not afraid, but because I was too tired of letting other people's fear decide my life. Meridian Holdings headquarters stood inside a glass tower in Brickell. As the elevator carried me up to the higher floor, my phone vibrated again. Natalie was calling. I looked at my sister's name lighting up on the screen, then declined the call. A voice message appeared right after. Maybe I should not have listened, but part of me still wanted to know how they were turning my absence into a crime. Natalie's rushed voice came through my earphones. Evelyn, Mom is losing her mind. No restaurant will take a reservation at this hour. Dad has called everywhere, and no one can help. Victoria Hayes is coming to dinner at our house tonight, and we have nothing decent to serve her. This is all your fault. I froze in the middle of the polished stone hallway. Victoria Hayes. The woman I was about to meet. The woman holding the biggest contract of my life in her hands. The woman my mother was hoping to impress at Christmas dinner. The dinner they thought I would cook. For a few seconds, everything in my head spun. My father must have known Victoria through some project. Natalie had probably tried to build a connection with Meridian to help my father's company. And none of them knew that the woman they were about to host in Denver had just flown from Miami to meet me. Not to eat the turkey I cooked, but to sign a contract with my company. If you can guess what happens when someone who has been looked down on meets the exact person who can expose the truth, leave your prediction in the comments. Do not forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel because the next part is when the whole room goes silent. The conference room door opened. Victoria's assistant smiled and invited me inside. The room was spacious with glass walls overlooking Biscayne Bay sunlight, spreading in golden streaks across the long table. At the head of the table, Victoria Hayes stood up. She was in her 50s, with elegant silver hair and eyes that were sharp without being cold. Her handshake was firm and decisive. "Ems. Carter," she said. "I've been looking forward to meeting the woman behind Carter and Bloom." No one in my family had ever said that to me. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. Victoria asked about my team, our crisis management capacity, and the way we maintained a high-end experience while still optimizing costs. I answered each question calmly, clearly, without apologizing for being good at what I did. When her pen touched the final page of the contract, I could hear my own heartbeat. "Welcome to Meridian," she said. After the signing, Victoria casually mentioned that she would be flying to Denver that afternoon for dinner with the Carter family. She asked whether I knew Richard Carter. I looked at the contract in my hands, then looked directly at her. "I've heard the name," I said softly. And for the first time, I chose to let the truth go exactly where it needed to go. When Victoria Hayes' plane left Miami for Denver, I boarded another flight a little later. But while I sat quietly in my seat, my hand resting on the leather briefcase that held the signed contract, my parents' house in Denver began falling into a kind of chaos they had not had to face by themselves in 15 years. At 5:30 in the evening, my mother walked into the kitchen wearing a dark green velvet dress and the pearl earrings she only wore when she wanted to impress someone. She had decorated the whole house like a perfect Christmas card. A wreath on the door, scented candles on the table, crystal glasses lined in rose napkins folded into fan shapes. Everything was exactly where it belonged except for the most important thing. There was no food. No golden turkey in the oven. No pot of mashed potatoes on the stove. No trays of appetizers covered in foil. No smell of butter, rosemary, pumpkin pie, or cranberry sauce. There was only a cold countertop, a clean sink, and the empty silence of a room that for the first time did not have me in it. "I thought she would change her mind," Natalie said from the kitchen doorway, her voice caught between irritation and panic. My mother turned sharply. "She always changes her mind. Evelyn always comes back in time." That sentence, according to what Grace told me later, even made a few hourly helpers who were arranging candles in the dining room glance at one another. Because in that house, everyone knew Evelyn would come. Evelyn would do it. Evelyn would fix it. Evelyn would lower her head. Except that evening, Evelyn was no longer there. My father walked in adjusting his tie in front of the small mirror beside the wine cabinet. "Margaret, the guests will be here soon. Where is the food?" My mother pointed at the empty kitchen. "Your daughter abandoned us. Call her." "I already did." "She's not answering." My father took out his phone and called several more times. I do not know whether my phone was on silent in my coat pocket then, or whether I saw the calls and chose not to answer. I only know it was the first time my absence had a clear shape inside that house. What followed was an hour of desperate damage control. My father called the Italian restaurant he knew, but they were fully booked. My mother called 3 catering services, and none of them accepted an order on Christmas Eve. Natalie called a friend who worked at a hotel, then snapped when she was turned down. Finally, my father sent his driver to the nearest grocery store, and he came back with whatever was left. 2 cold rotisserie chickens, a few boxes of pre-made salad bread, still in plastic bags, a packaged cheese tray, and some gingerbread cookies with broken edges. At 6:30, the guests began to arrive. They stepped into a brightly lit house, heard soft Christmas music, accepted glasses of wine from my mother's hand, and slowly realized that something was very wrong. There was no smell of dinner. No sound of knives on cutting boards. No familiar woman moving through the room with a tray of hot appetizers in her hands. Grace Whitman looked toward the kitchen, her brows drawing together slightly. She had attended enough Carter dinners to know that everything usually ran because of one person who was never properly named. "Margaret," she asked, gently, "is Evelyn not coming?" My mother's smile froze for half a second. "She has a little personal matter," my mother replied. "We're just having a small issue with the food." But when Victoria Hayes walked in a little after 7, that small issue had become something the entire room could no longer pretend not to see. Victoria Hayes walked into my parents' house with a cream-colored coat draped over her arm and the polite smile of someone who was used to reading a room within seconds. My mother immediately moved toward her and embraced her, as if they had been close for years, while my father shook her hand firmly, trying to steer the conversation toward the real estate project he was pursuing. Natalie stood beside them, a polished smile on her lips, introducing herself as the marketing lead at Carter Supply. Victoria was polite to everyone, but according to Grace, her eyes lingered a little longer when she looked toward the dining room. On the table were 2 rotisserie chickens transferred onto porcelain platters, a few bowls of hastily tossed salad bread still carrying the creases of its plastic bag, and a cheese tray decorated with a few sprigs of rosemary in an attempt to make it look less pitiful. "It seems everyone chose a more casual style this year," Victoria said lightly. My mother gave a strained laugh. "Just a little last-minute change. Evelyn usually helps with the kitchen, but today she was being difficult." The word "helps" fell into the room like a shard of glass. Grace looked at my mother. Harold looked at my father. Natalie quickly lifted her wineglass to her lips to hide her discomfort. Victoria only tilted her head. "Evelyn?" she asked. "Our older daughter," my father answered quickly. "She does some small party planning work. You probably wouldn't know her." At that exact moment, Grace's phone lit up. She had been scrolling through LinkedIn to look up Meridian, probably out of curiosity about Victoria. Then she froze. Her eyes widened, her finger stopping on the screen. Richard, Grace said slowly. "Margaret, you two should see this." She turned the phone around. On the screen was a new post from Meridian Holdings. The photo showed Victoria Hayes shaking hands with a woman in a charcoal suit, standing in a conference room overlooking Biscayne Bay. That woman was me. The caption below congratulated Carter and Bloom Events and its founder Evelyn Carter on the exclusive partnership contract for the coming year. The air around the Christmas tree seemed to stop moving. If you were Evelyn, would you stay silent and let the truth speak for itself? Or would you walk into that room and confront them? Comment 1, if you would stay silent. Comment 2, if you would face them. If you think this reversal deserves it, like the video, share it and subscribe to the channel to support stories like this. My mother stared at the screen as if it were a trick. That's impossible. Victoria stepped closer. She looked at the photo, then at my parents. In her eyes, surprise quickly changed into a cold, sharp kind of understanding. Evelyn Carter is your daughter. No one answered right away. Grace pulled up the Forbes article. There's this too. The article from October. Evelyn Carter, the woman behind a more than $4 million events company. A few guests moved closer. Whispers began spreading through the room. 23 employees. Millions in revenue. A contract with Meridian. Forbes. Each word landed like a nail hammered into the perfect image my parents had built over so many years. Nathalie went pale. She never said anything. Victoria looked at her for a long time. Perhaps because no one truly asked. That sentence silenced the room. My mother set down her wineglass, her hand trembling slightly. My father stared at Grace's phone as if he were looking at an indictment. And Victoria, the woman they had tried to impress with a perfect dinner, had accidentally exposed the most humiliating truth of all. They had made a $1 million chief executive officer stand in the kitchen for 15 years, then called it family. After Victoria's words, no one cared about the cold food on the table anymore. The Carter living room was still glowing with warm golden lights, the Christmas tree still sparkled, and Christmas music still played softly from the speaker beside the fireplace. But the atmosphere had changed completely. It was no longer an elegant dinner. It felt like a silent trial, one where my parents were being forced to look directly at everything they had avoided for years. Grace Whitman was the first to break the silence. She looked at my mother, not harshly, but with unmistakable disappointment in her eyes. "Margaret," she said, "I've been coming to your house for dinner for years. Every time I saw Evelyn in the kitchen, but I never once heard you speak about her like this." My mother tried to keep her composure. "Grace, you don't understand our family." "Maybe I don't understand all of it," Grace replied. "But I do understand one thing. A person does not simply disappear from her own family's dinner table for years unless the whole family has become used to letting her disappear." My father stepped forward, his voice hardening. "This is a private matter." Victoria turned to him. She did not raise her voice, but every word was clear. "Esther Carter, I signed a contract with your daughter this morning." She was more prepared than most chief executive officers I've met. She understands her team, her finances, her risks, and her clients. And yet, here you call her work a few small parties. No one dared to interrupt. Harold Whitman, the man to whom my father had once introduced Natalie as the bright successor, looked at him very differently now. "Richard, if my daughter had built a company like that, I would talk about it to anyone willing to listen. Why have you never mentioned Evelyn?" My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. Because the real answer was too shameful. He never mentioned me, because he did not know. He did not know because he had never asked. And he had never asked, because in his mind I had already been placed inside a small box. The daughter who was not truly successful, the daughter who could be called home to help in the kitchen, the daughter who did not need to be introduced. Natalie set her wineglass down harder than necessary. She didn't say anything either. How can everyone blame us? Victoria looked at her with eyes so sharp that Natalie had to turn away. She is not responsible for submitting proof of her worth to the people who should have loved her first. That sentence made my mother go pale. A few guests began to whisper. Some remembered previous years when they had seen me carry food out and then disappear. Some remembered how my mother always said Natalie was busy, Natalie was under pressure, Natalie had a big future. And Evelyn was simply good at things in the kitchen. Those small memories suddenly came together into a picture that was very hard to deny. My mother sat down in the chair beside the Christmas tree. For the first time that night, she no longer looked like a woman who had everything under control. My father moved toward his study, but before he could leave, Harold called after him. "Richard, if you plan to discuss business with me next year, I think the person I want to meet first is Evelyn." The study door closed behind my father. Not loudly, but heavily enough. Victoria set her untouched glass of wine on the table. "Thank you for the invitation tonight," she said to my mother. "It was very memorable. But I think I should leave." She walked to the door. No one stopped her. And when the door closed, the house was still full of guests, full of lights, full of music. But the glittering shell of the Carter family had shattered right in the middle of the living room. I learned what had happened at the party on the morning of December 26th, not from my parents, but from Grace Whitman. She called while I was sitting in my office with the Meridian implementation plan open in front of me. Her voice was gentle, but there was a sincere shame in it. "Evelyn," she said, "I'm sorry. That night the whole room finally saw you. Late, but they saw you." I looked through the glass window. Snow was falling slowly over Denver. Sometimes apologies from outsiders are kinder than all the silence inside your own family. "Thank you for telling me," I replied. After the call, I opened my phone. The messages were piled up like a room after a storm. My mother wrote that I had humiliated her. Natalie said I had deliberately made the family look like a joke. My father texted that we needed to have a serious conversation about how families should treat one another. I read all of it and realized the most painful part was not their anger. The most painful part was that not one of them began with congratulations. No one said, "I'm proud of you." No one said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." No one asked what that contract meant to me. There was only their embarrassment wrapped in the word family. That evening, I sat at the dining table in my apartment. My laptop was open in front of me, and the Forbes issue I had once hidden away was beside it. I did not want to write a letter full of rage. I wanted to write a boundary. Clear, calm, and impossible for anyone to pretend they had misunderstood. If it were you, would you give your family one more chance or keep your distance for a long time? Comment 1 if you would choose another chance. Comment 2 if you would choose boundaries. And if you believe respect should not have to be begged for, like this video, share it, and subscribe to the channel. I began to type, "To Dad, Mom, and Natalie." I signed the contract with Meridian Holdings on the morning of December 24th. That is why I was not there to cook Christmas dinner. For 15 years I stood in the kitchen for family gatherings, while my work was treated like a small hobby. When I said I had an important meeting, Mom laughed. When I said no, I was called selfish. I will not apologize for choosing my work. I will also not return to my old role. If I attend family gatherings, I will come as a guest, as an equal member of this family, not as a servant. My work needs to be respected. My time needs to be asked for in advance, not assumed. If all of you want to rebuild a relationship with me, start with the truth. I reread the email 3 times. Then I pressed send. There was no explosive movie scene. Only a quiet apartment and snow falling outside the window. For the first time, I was not waiting for them to give me permission to walk out of the kitchen. The aftershock of that Christmas night did not stop inside my parents' living room. It spread outward quietly but quickly, like a crack running beneath ice. Meridian's post about the contract with Carter and Bloom was shared all over LinkedIn. People in the industry congratulated us. A few former clients messaged to say they were proud to have worked with us. A business magazine emailed asking to interview me about the journey of building a company from almost nothing. Meanwhile, in my parents' world, things moved in a very different direction. Grace posted a line on Facebook. She did not name anyone, but everyone who knew the Carter family understood what she meant. She wrote that sometimes the most successful person in a room is the one that room has ignored the longest. That sentence spread through my mother's circle of friends like a quiet but painful reminder. People who had once eaten dinner in our home began calling. They asked about my company. They asked why my mother had never mentioned that I had been featured in Forbes. They asked politely, but behind every question was a judgment they could not fully hide. My father was pulled into that wave too. Harold Whitman emailed Carter and Bloom, not through my father, not asking for an introduction, not using a family connection. He wrote directly to our business development team, requesting a meeting to discuss the launch event for a new project. When Marcus forwarded the email to me, he added only one short sentence. "The wheel has turned in your direction now." I did not laugh. I only stared at the screen for a long time. Once I had hoped my father would introduce me to people like Harold. I had imagined that if he said just one word, the door would open more easily. But it turned out that once I stopped waiting for him, the door opened under my own name. Natalie stayed silent for several days. Later, I heard that she had tried to contact Victoria's office again to discuss supply opportunities for Meridian, but only received a polite response saying that all proposals had to go through the standard process. For Natalie, perhaps it was the first time a door did not open by itself simply because she was the daughter my parents had placed in the light. On December 29th, an envelope arrived at my apartment. Not an email. Not a text message. A handwritten letter. My father's handwriting sat on the page firm and slightly slanted, just like the cards he used to sign in a hurry on my birthdays. I almost did not open it. Part of me was afraid I would find another request asking me to understand the family. But in the end, I still cut open the edge of the envelope. My father wrote that it had taken him days to understand what he had missed. He said he had always believed he was a fair father, but in truth he had only seen what he wanted to see. He wanted Natalie to succeed, so he looked for her achievements. He believed I was struggling, so even when I built an entire company, he still only saw the daughter standing in the kitchen. The final line made me put the letter down. "I see you now, Evelyn. Late, not enough but sincerely. And I am proud of you." I did not cry right away. I only sat still for a long time at my kitchen table where no one was ordering me to do anything. That letter did not erase 15 years. But for the first time, my father was not asking me to make myself smaller so the family could stay comfortable. He was only admitting that I had been there all along. On New Year's Eve that year, I stood by the window of my apartment watching fireworks bloom across the Denver sky. The city lit up, then sank back into a thin layer of snow. On the kitchen table, my father's letter lay beside a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I had read it many times. Each time a different feeling rose inside me. Anger. Sadness. Relief. Doubt. Close to midnight, I called my father. He answered immediately as if he had been sitting by the phone for a long time, waiting. "I read your letter," I said. On the other end, he was silent. I could faintly hear my mother asking who was calling tack-toed. My father did not answer her. "Thank you for calling," he said. "I wasn't sure you still wanted to hear me speak." "I'm not sure either," I replied. "But if we are going to have anything after this, it cannot be the way it was before." I spoke slowly, one sentence at a time. I would not come to family gatherings to cook, clear the table, or save anyone's image. If I came, I would come as a daughter, a sister, a respected guest. My work would no longer be something people dismissed with a faint laugh. My time would no longer be something anyone had the right to take without asking. If my mother or Natalie used the word family to force me into silence, I would leave. My father did not argue. He did not say I was too sensitive. He did not tell me I was making everything bigger than it was. He only said, "I understand." 15 years could not be repaired with one phone call. But for the first time, I did not need him to understand everything in order for me to keep my boundaries. When the clock struck midnight, fireworks burst outside the window. Marcus texted me, "Happy New Year, boss. Next year is going to be yours." I looked at the words and smiled. Not because everything had healed, but because I knew I would never go back to being the woman standing in the kitchen waiting for other people to remember that she deserved a seat at the table. After the call, I wrote down my own rules. I would not apologize for being successful. I would not accept disrespect disguised as a joke. I would not sacrifice myself to preserve the false beauty of a family that refused to see me. If this story reminds you of a time when you were overlooked, comment "I deserve to be seen." Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories about boundaries, self-respect, and delayed justice. Many people called what happened to my family a sweet revenge. But I do not think it was. Revenge means you are still placing your heart in the hands of the people who once hurt it. I simply took mine back. I did not destroy Christmas dinner. I just stopped standing behind it, holding it up. And sometimes the moment you stop saving other people from their own consequences is also the moment you begin saving yourself.